reached its height between the years AD 428 to 468. This great Vandal chief had his headquarters in Africa, but as Gibbon states, the discovery and conquest of the black nations in Africa that might dwell beneath the torrid zone could not tempt the rational ambition of Genseric, but he cast his eyes towards the sea. He resolved to create a naval power, and his bold resolution was executed with steady and active perseverance. From the port of Carthage, he repeatedly made piratical sallies, preyed on the Roman commerce, and waged war with that empire. The Vandals were unique among the German nations by the fact that they maintained a fleet. The loss of Africa was perhaps one of the greatest calamities which could have overtaken the Western Empire. And the reason being that Africa was the granary of Rome, so the loss of Africa meant the loss of a main source of Rome's food supply. Genseric even sailed up to the Tiber and he sacked the city of Rome. Amongst the treasures that he took from that city were the golden candlesticks and the golden table and other items that Titus had captured from the temple of Jerusalem. When the Vandal fleet was returning to Carthage, there arose a great storm, and one ship only submerged beneath the ocean. It was the ship carrying the golden candlestick and the sacred vessels which originally had come from the temple of God in Jerusalem. And that was found in Edward Gibbon. That's interesting, isn't it? The one ship that has stolen these goods is the one ship that sank. And here we see the migration of the Vandals and how they settled in Africa, and from Africa they launched their naval attacks. Before he died, in the fullness of the year and of glory, he beheld the final extinction of the Empire of the West. The second trumpet period was between 428 AD to 468 AD. In 533, the Byzantine general Belisarius landed in Africa. The Vandals were several times defeated and Carthage was entered, and the same year they were routed in the decisive battle of Triclinium. In the next year, Africa, Sardinia and Corsica were restored to the Roman Empire. As a nation, the Vandals soon ceased to exist. And notice that the Vandals was one of the 3 horns to be plucked up. There are few instances in history of a nation disappearing so rapidly and so completely as the Vandals of Africa. It is reckoned that during the reign of Justinian, the emperor of Eastern Rome, Africa lost 5 million of its inhabitants. Thus, Arianism was extinguished in that region, not by any enforcement of conformity, but by the extermination of the race which had introduced and professed it. This was history of the Christian ode. And this was the removal of the second horn in 533 AD. Revelation chapter 8, 10 to 11. And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. The third trumpet, in the interpretation and application of this passage, we are brought to the third important event which resulted in the subversion of the Roman Empire. Wormwood. Why do we sit still? Assemble yourselves and let us enter into the defenced cities, and let us be silent there. For the Lord our God hath put us to silence, and given us water of gall to drink, because we have sinned against the Lord. Here gall is likened to wormwood. We looked for peace, but no good came, and for a time of health, and behold trouble. The snorting of his horses was heard from Dan. The whole land trembled at the sound of the neighing of his strong ones. For they are come, and they devoured the land and all that in it, the city and those that dwell therein. Jeremiah chapter 8, 14 to 16. And in Amos chapter 5, we also find in Jeremiah chapter 9, Therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will feed them, even this people with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. I will scatter them also among the heathen, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I will send the sword after them till I have consumed them. And ye who turn judgment to wormwood, and leave off righteousness in the earth. So here we see this term wormwood or gall or this poison is likened with punishment. Wormwood, what is it? A plant called the Artemisia. It has a bitter, nauseous taste, but it is a stomachic also and a corroborant which helps strengthen the stomach. It's a tree wormwood, a species of Artemisia with woody stalks. And the Orientals typified sorrow, cruelties and calamities of any kind by plants of a poisonous or bitter nature. We find this in Proverbs chapter 5. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil, but her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell. In Jude chapter 1 verse 13, raging waves of the sea, foaming out of their own shame, wandering stars to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. A falling star here then may not only refer to Satan, but to human leaders, even religious leaders. So we find this in Jude that these wandering stars are leaders that have a false message. This third trumpet related to Attila the Hun. It is here premised that this trumpet has allusion to the desolating wars and furious invasions of Attila, king of the Huns, against the Roman power. Speaking of this warrior, particularly of his personal appearance, Barnes says, in the manner of his appearance, he strongly resembled a brilliant meteor in the sky. He came from the east, gathering his Huns, and poured them down, as we shall see, with the rapidity of a flashing meteor. Suddenly on the empire, he regarded himself also as devoted to Mars, the god of war, and was accustomed to array himself in a peculiarly brilliant manner, so that his appearance in the language of his flatterers was such as to dazzle the eyes of the beholders. In speaking of the locality of the events predicted by this trumpet, Barnes has this note. It is said particularly that the effect would be on the rivers and on the fountains of waters. If this has a literal application, or if, as was supposed in the case of the second trumpet, the language used was such as had reference to the portion of the empire that would be particularly affected by the hostile invasion, then we may suppose that this refers to those portions of the empire that abounded in rivers and streams, and more particularly those in which the rivers and streams had the origin, for the effect was permanently in the fountains of waters. As a matter of fact, the principal operations of Attila were in the regions of the Alps and on the portions of the empire, hence the rivers flow down into Italy. The invasion of Attila is described by Gibbon in this general language. The whole breadth of Europe, as it extended above 500 miles from the Euxine to the Adriatic, was at once invaded and occupied and desolated by the myriads of barbarians whom Attila led into the field. The name of the star is called wormwood. The word wormwood denotes bitter consequences. These words, which are more intimately connected with the preceding verse, as even the punctuation in our version denotes, recall us for a moment to the character of Attila, to the misery of which he was the author of the instrument, and to the terror that was inspired by his name. He would even call himself the scourge of God. And here we see the invasion of the Huns under Attila. And as quickly as he appeared on the scene, as quickly he disappeared. He didn't last very long. Total extirpation and erasure are terms which best denote the calamities he inflicted. He styled himself the scourge of God. The rise of the great Hunnic power which threatened European civilization in the 5th century was as sudden and rapid as its fall. And the third trumpet period was between 433 to 453 AD. Revelation chapter 8:12. And the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. Sun, moon, and stars. We go to Isaiah chapter 13. The burden of Babylon which Isaiah the son of Amos did see, for the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. How was Babylon to fall? Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them,